Welcome back to Worldview. I'm joined now by two very interesting guests, Philip Judge and Simon Heapes. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Hi Stella, it's great to be joining you here today.
Now you gentlemen are both directors of Anglo Far East, the world's first and original private gold and silver custodial company, which operates from Zurich, Switzerland. And more recently, you've become involved in starting a new company called Unique, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But first, Philip, I'd like to start with you. As well as being a gold banker and entrepreneur, you've been described as being on a crusade to expose what you have called the greatest deception in all of human history. Now that is a very bold claim.
Well Stella, in history there's been many deceptions and cover-ups and even outright frauds, and some of these have even been on a very large scale, as we can see from history. But never in history has there been a deception as big as this one, as grand scale as this one. And I'll give you three reasons. First of all, this deception is global. It's affecting 7 billion people alive on planet Earth today. The second reason is the time that it's existed, it's been allowed to continue for so long now. And the third reason is the far-reaching implications of this deception itself. It's affecting literally 97% of people alive today, and not only that, it's affecting and will affect unborn generations for many years to come if it's allowed to continue.
Well, it's definitely a subject you seem very passionate about, and I'm certainly intrigued, so tell me more.
Well, it affects 190 nations in the world today, and it revolves around the simple fact that 7 billion people have not been told the truth. They've been lied to, in effect, by their government about the money that we are using every day of the week. And I think the second thing about this is it's lasted for 100 years now. For 100 years, our leaders have been unwilling to tell us the truth about our money and to talk about it publicly. And it revolves around this simple proverb: the borrower becomes the slave to the lender. So what I want to do is turn the clocks back 100 years. 100 years ago, the nations of the world had money, like we always do, but at that time the money was backed by the wealth and the productivity of the individual nations. And then systematically, through the last 100 years, nations have started establishing these things called central banks, and then granting to the central bank the right to issue the money, to create the money through debt, and then lend that money to the nation and to the people of the nation itself. So in effect, from that single one move, what we've done is we've systematically indebted every nation in the world today, and of course its people. This is why we're living at a time of man's highest achievement on planet Earth, and yet we're more indebted today than we ever have been. And of course this monetary system that we're talking about indebts the nation, indebts the people of the nation, and of course it leads to this thing that we're all learning to live with today, which is called inflation. It's the reason that we've got these financial institution collapses happening at a record pace that we've never seen ever before in history. And of course we're seeing rioting in the streets as people are trying to deal with the heavy burdens of debt and the inflation that they're living with. And it's all happened because of this monetary deception. So our crusade is to expose the truth of today's monetary system and then bring about a change for the 97% of people that are affected by it, to put into their hands the way that they can protect themselves from this monetary deception.
Simon, inflation is a subject you've written and spoken a lot about. I guess we all see inflation around us and try to just live with it. But in simple terms, what is it?
Inflation is, in very simple terms, is literally inflating money supply into the system. It's just pouring it in, and then what happens is that it's literally like adding water to paint, where it takes one coat of paint to get the desired effect. As you put more water into the paint, it's taking more coats of paint to get the same desired effect. It's exactly the same with inflation. That's why the cost of goods are going up. That's why the cost of living is going up. But first, inflation is good for everybody. It pours into things like investments, then it overflows into things like real estate, and then it gets to its final stage is going into the cost of living. And that's where we're at today.
So you're saying inflation is global?
Absolutely, inflation is global. What's taking place is that the inflation is happening to the world's reserve currency. In other words, that currency is backing all of the other currencies around the world. because all currencies are floated against the US dollar. In other words, nations around the world hold US dollars as reserves to issue against for their own currency into the system. And when they exchange goods between nations, nations receive US dollars back to its central banks, which then in turn goes back to the goods suppliers of those nations in the form of its own currency that they inflate with